Hey everyone, Salena here, Salena Baca Crochet. It's Thursday. I love to do an Ask Me Anything kind of video on Thursdays, but I forgot to post an Ask Me Anything thread in my group this week, but I did have a fantastic question asked in one of my other groups, American Crochet Association, and it was such a great question, and I just put together this entire response for it, and I thought, I'm gonna snag that. It's gonna be today's Ask Me Anything. It's kind of about a few things. It's mainly about crocheting hats and crocheting hats that fit, and kind of what's the magic behind doing that. And I've got quite a few resources for you guys. I've already posted them in the video description. So after this chat, you guys can click on over and kind of read more and get some helpful resources. If you are watching live, come on over, say hey, say hello, tell me where you're viewing from. If you have any crochet questions at all, go on ahead and post them. And after I go through this first bit, it's just going to be an open floor. And I'd love to hear what you guys think. All right, so how to crochet hats that fit. Again, this was a question. It was a lengthy question. It was in another group. Essentially, there was someone who was trying to crochet a hat from one of my patterns. And as they were working through it, this hat pattern comes in multiple sizes. It is worked in joined rounds, double crochet from the top down. And I wrote this pattern as a teaching resource for quite a few things. Does it make a hat? Yeah, it does. But again, it's also kind of a pattern reading resource. And within pattern reading, I want people to understand yarn choice, gauge, size, hook choice, tension, things like that. So it's supposed to be this simplistic pattern that helps you to or that guides you through making sure that you have the right tools and the right resources to make this thing on a very simplistic level. And that way you can kind of do other things because you have a good understanding for those elements. Now, this particular person was saying that they were having difficulty following this pattern and it coming out to size. And so there's lots of reasons that this happens, and that's what this video is all about. So first and foremost, whenever you're following a crochet pattern and size matters, first and foremost, you really have to look at what yarn was used, specifically what exact kind of yarn, what size of yarn, what the brand is, what the type is. Also what hook was used, and then what the pattern writer says their gauge is. Now, gauge is a measurement of stitches per inch and rows per inch. So all of those details are going to be really helpful for you to mimic whatever the pattern says. And that's really crucial, especially for something like a hat, because this particular hat pattern comes in lots of different sizes. So if you want to make a 14-inch hat for a person with a 14-inch head, there's a big difference between that, a 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-inch hat. There's a huge difference between all those sizes, especially when we're talking about head size. Hats are one of those things to where an inch is going to make a huge difference. It's either, you're either going to pull it on your head and stretch it out because it's too small, or it's just going to swallow your head and it's not really going to function. So again, even an inch is really going to matter. So that's why this hat pattern is such a great tool, I think. So let's talk about yarn first. When you're making a hat and it says something like Red Heart, Super Saver, Ombre, Worsted number 4. That's a ton of information, but let's take all that, okay? If you're not going to be using Red Heart, Super Saver, Ombre number 4, you're going to be using another one. Know that all of those details about that yarn is telling you what that strand is going to do in terms of measurement. So it's a really good idea to find an exact-ish substitute for that particular yarn, because not all worsted yarns are created equal. You could have even yarns within the exact same brand. So let's say you choose another Red Heart yarn, and let's say maybe it is a worsted yarn. It might work up slightly differently. That yarn might be a little bigger, it might be a little smaller. So even though the yarn label says this is a worsted yarn, it might not work up to be exactly the same. Sometimes you can literally just look at 2 strands of yarn. Sometimes you can just look at them and feel them and go, this one feels more dense. This one doesn't feel as dense. And just kind of, you know, just something as simplistic as that, you can go, this one that's not as dense is going to probably work up smaller than this one that is dense. Density is not going to, you know, it's going to need more room. It's not going to squish in on itself. It's going to, by nature, be a little larger. And so just kind of feeling those two together, that's going to be a great indicator for what kind of fabric it's going to create. And again, we're talking inches here, right? You know, some things where if you're making a wrap or a shawl or a blanket, a couple inches may or may not make a huge difference. Really just depends on what you're making. But a hat, that's where we really need to get down to the fundamentals. So things that I like to do, things that you can easily do, you can go to Yarn Sub. You can just type in Red Heart Super Saver Ombre, and it will give you yarn alternatives that are going to be good matches. You can sort through those, sort through what comes up based on fiber. Maybe you don't want an acrylic. Maybe you want something else. Maybe you want to pull out acrylic. You don't want to see acrylic. You know, things of that nature. So you can really kind of distill down what could be a good match just based on that site alone. So that's a good resource. Now, next, okay. Or let me also say, and I have a resource on this, okay? There's a few other things that you can do to kind of determine if the yarn that you're going to substitute with is going to be a good match. So one is just using Yarn Sub, 2, looking at the 2 yarns together, kind of feeling them and seeing, do they feel the same? Are they going to be the same? Let's say you don't have these yarns kind of in your hands, you know, maybe you've never touched, you don't have access to Red Heart Super Saver Ombre. You're like, I don't know what that looks like or feels like. I just need a yarn that's going to, you know, work up about the same. That's where you can, again, you can even use yarnsub.com and you can look up the characteristics of that yarn. Like, for example, you know, how many stitches per inch it works up with a particular hook size. You know, you can kind of look at those details and find similarities. Or you can do something like the wrap per inch test. If you're not certain what that is, you don't have to have a super fancy tool like this. You can literally just use anything that can measure. Maybe you have a ruler like this. Maybe you've got a fancy little tool like this. Maybe you've got a pencil. It doesn't matter. You're just looking for a way to kind of wrap yarn around 1 inch. And however many times it wraps within 1 inch, that gives it a particular size range, you know? So if Red Heart Super Saver Ombre can be wrapped 8 times over 1 inch, then you're looking for a yarn that can also be wrapped 8 times in 1 inch. And that's going to mean, all right, that yarn is going to probably work up about the same because the wrap per inch is about the same. Okay, so another resource that I want to give you guys, all right, we've talked about substitution. We've talked about different things to kind of ask, different things to do, to distill down how do I get the right yarn, how do I get the right tool to make sure that this hat that I'm making is going to be as close to the gauge and the size in this pattern as possible. Okay, so after going through that work, how do you know that whatever it is that you're making, let's talk about working something in joined rounds from the center out, that can be a little more tricky than just working something that is flat in rows, because when something's flat in rows, it's like, I can totally measure that 20 stitches equals, you know, 8 inches. I can totally measure that 4 rows equals 3 inches. Those things are a little more apparent. But whenever we're working in joined rounds from the top down, how can you tell after just a few rounds that, you know, how can you tell what size you are making? And that's the thing that's a little more tricky. So I've got something super cool for you guys. Again, link is in the video description. So I came up with a tool, a calculator, based on some mathiness. I'm not really a math nerd, but I really like this tip, and that's why I'm sharing it. So whenever you're working in joined rounds from a center outwards, and you're making something like a hat, and it does have to be a specific size, how can you tell that after 3 rounds or 4 rounds, it looks so tiny? So you may go, what? So really, around the circle is circumference, and that's the thing that you want to fit around the circumference of your head. But then there's also, because it's a circle, from side to side of the circle, so a cross section, that's the diameter. So you can measure the diameter to get the circumference. And I've got a handy little calculator, and that way you can just plug your numbers in and, you know, just get that answer. And I put all of the rhyme and the reason behind why, you know, how you can find diameter, how you can take diameter to find the circumference. And again, you can use that tool to help you. Why I think this is such a great revolutionary way to measure what it is that you're working in rounds is that you may feel like you're doing everything right. You may feel like you substituted right. You may kind of feel like, all right, I think it's 3 stitches per inch, and that's what the pattern says. I think I'm right. It's really hard to measure stitches in this curvature. And so utilizing the diameter is going to help eliminate that guesswork. So if you guys want to check this out, again, I've got a calculator. It's super fun. It's super cool to use. And really, you can use it for any stitch. So it doesn't matter what stitch you're using, single, half, double, double, triple, does not matter. It will help you to take the diameter and figure out what the circumference is. And at that point, you can determine, am I on track? Am I making a hat that's going to fit whatever size that I'm making? It's a great tool. Okay, so I've got that resource for you guys. I've got understanding yarn substitution. So I've got all of those tips that I just talked about in terms of yarn substitution. And I also have some free hat patterns for you guys to try. So if you want to put any of this into action and you want to work hats that are worked in rounds, joined or not, doesn't matter, any stitch, and work them from the top down and make sure that whatever yarn you're using, whatever hook you're using, whatever your sizing is, whatever your gauge and size is, that you're making that to match the pattern instructions, the gauge and the size is indicated. So check out those 3 resources. Take a peek at that calculator, because I'd love to hear what you guys think. All right, and on that note, let's see who's here and what you guys are saying. Again, the floor is open to any questions. If you guys have any crochet questions, we can make it a fun conversation. It looks like Tanya is here. Hillary Thompson is here. Cheryl is here. Alenka is here. Monica Mercado, so good to see you. Carol Ann is watching. Willa McCall is here. Delia Flores. Jasmine is here today. Heather Moyd is watching. Rolina is here. Lydia is here. Shelly McDaniels, thank you for checking in today. Let's see who else is here. Elizabeth Holder. Lizzie, so many people are watching today. Lizzie, hello to you. Thank you for checking in. All the way from Scotland. Hello, hello, my friend from Scotland. Thanks for watching. Daisy is here. Hello, my friend Daisy. Long time no see. So good to see you. Natasa is here. Helen is here. Karen is here. Crystal Brink is watching. Mar is watching. Debbie Griffiths, my good friend, my good crochet friend who I've never met. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Brenda Allison, good afternoon to you. So good to see you. Dora's here. Hello, Dora Shade. So good to see you. Hello, Delia Flores. Good to see you too. All right, guys. No questions. I guess we're good on the questions today. No questions. Well, anyway, I loved that question that was asked in my other group. I thought it was a great question, and hopefully those resources I shared with you guys, hopefully they'll be fun. Maybe you'll learn something, and if you follow along with any of those, share it. I'd love to see. And as always, I think it's really important to ask crochet questions. It doesn't matter how long you've been crocheting or how many things you've crocheted. I love having these open Q&As like this because I feel like I always learn something or brush up on my skills, and I love just sharing things that have worked well for me. So hopefully it's that way for you. All right, now I see you guys are chatting over here. Daisy says, I've missed you. Hope you're well. Thank you for always giving such wonderful tips. My pleasure. I know I haven't been here doing the chats as much lately, so it's good to get back on track and have a good schedule. Gerland is here. I'm currently knitting a sweater, but I also crochet and sew. Multi-crafty. Debbie, she says, you're always helpful. I try real hard. I really do. Dealey says, always learn something. Jane Campbell is here. Oh, Gerlind. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I think it's Gerlind. Do you know any good hooks for sore hands? Oh, that's a good question. Let me see. Let me think about that for a second. Let me just give some tips without repping any one particular hook brand or type. And the reason I'm saying that is that, you know, you may hold your yarn and hook a particular way, and however you hold your yarn and hook, that may determine what types of crochet hooks are going to be comfortable to you, okay? For example, I hold my hook in my hand. I hold it kind of like a knife or a spoon. Some people hold it on top of their hand like a pencil. So depending on where your hook is in your hand, you're going to grip it differently. You're going to use it differently. So if you're finding that your hands have any kind of discomfort while you're crocheting, a few things that you can change. And again, it could be happening for lots of different reasons. I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. First and foremost, it could be things as simple as maybe you just need to stretch your hands more. Maybe you need to use your hands and fingers in ways that stretch them. And so that way, whenever you're crocheting, you don't have cramped claw hands. So stretching and making sure that you're hydrated and lots of water, that's really kind of a helpful thing. That's not going to fix everybody's problems all the time, no matter what. If you find that you're uncomfortable after what you think maybe is a reasonable amount of time, right? Maybe you're crocheting for 20 minutes and you're like, that's all I got. Now my hands are cramped. Think about where your hands are cramped. Are your fingers cramped? Are your palms cramped? Are your thumbs cramped? Is it your wrists? Is it your forearms? Is it your shoulders? Think about where you're finding this discomfort. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that sometimes when I'm crocheting with cotton yarn and a small hook, and you know, I'm creating a really tight fabric. To do that, I have to take a lot of the slack out of my fabric, which means I'm crocheting a little tighter. And to crochet tighter, it means that my body is so much more tense, and I'm probably like this. So depending on what you're making, some things that you're making, some materials like cotton, like a small hook, some of those things are going to force you, or your body is naturally going to tense up, and it's going to be harder to crochet for longer periods of time without that discomfort, right? So maybe you're just like, no, I use worsted weight yarn and it's acrylic and it slides off my hook and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I'm just looking for, my hands could have a better experience. If so, I'll say this. I used to use crochet hooks like this, and I did my entire life, right? And I thought, a hook is a hook. I had like 5 hooks, and I'm like, I'm good. This is all I need. I'm not doing anything else. And then a couple years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to crochet hooks with polymer clay handles. And at first I was like, I don't need it. It's extra. It's just this thing that's, you know, it's just this extra thing. So anyway, I find that it makes a huge difference because it's so much more to hold on to that my grip isn't as tight because, you know, it has more weight to it and it just has so much more heft to it. Heft, weight, it's just bigger. So my hand doesn't feel like I'm going to lose it. I have to really hold on to it. So just because this grip part, and I'm not advocating specifically for just these polymer clay hooks. You can have any kind of crochet hook that just has a bigger handle, or you could even manufacture a handle and slap it on here yourself if you want. But when you have more to hold on to, you're not gripping as tightly, and when you're not doing that, you know, your body is so much more relaxed and you can crochet for longer periods of time, I found. So there's lots of different hook styles that have a fatter, you know, kind of grip, this end that just has more. So if you want to try a hook like this, if it's how you know, maybe this isn't going to be as comfortable for you because you're holding your hook like this, maybe you don't need all of this weight. Maybe you want a crochet hook that is lighter, in which case you don't want all this extra stuff, and you know, maybe you don't want to go this route. Again, it's all about how you hold your hook. So again, those are some things that you can do to kind of see what works best whenever you're trying a new crochet hook. If you're trying to see which hook you like best in terms of like comfort and things like that, you know, put it under the same circumstances, right? So if you want to try the difference between maybe a boy hook and a Bates hook, or, you know, a clover hook and a furls hook, or, you know, whatever, try it all with, try each one of those with the same yarn. Try each one of those hooks in the same size. And that way you can kind of get a, you know, a good feeling for maybe what's going to work best for you. Whew, man, that's a lot of information. And last but not least, I will say, if you're feeling discomfort and you're not sure if it's your hook or the materials or whatever, I will say that whenever you stretch and you're hydrated before you crochet, and then you stretch and you're hydrated after you crochet, and you do things like use an ice pack, use a heating pad, really stretch, you know, take hot showers and warm baths and things like that, whatever you can do to loosen up your muscles and to stop the fatigue that you're going to have in your hands and your arms, it's not only going to give you a better experience no matter when you're crocheting, whether it's short stints or longer stints, but it's, you know, there's going to be less recovery time from those longer stints of crochet that you have. So hopefully that's some good advice. Hopefully there's nuggets of wisdom in there somewhere. All right, so let me know what you think. Lizzie, just in the beginning of my crochet, you have taught me after years of trying, so thank you. Oh, Lizzie, just in the beginning of my crochet, you have taught me. Oh, well, I wonder how you learned, what resource you use, but I'm so glad that it was helpful, and welcome to crochet, and I'm glad that it's a good experience, Lizzie. Thank you. Lisa Wickersham is here. Hello, hello. Jane Campbell is here from South England. I wish I was in England right now. Man, I'm really missing England. I hope you're having a good time today. Karen Anderson is here. Kimberly is watching. Susanna is here. Jessica Millard is here. Hello, my friend. Gerlind is here. Let's see. What to do when your rows shrink? Like when you make a blanket, the edge is not straight. Okay, I feel like that might be two different questions. I'm seeing those as two different questions, maybe even if you're not. I think those are two different circumstances. Great questions, though. What to do when your rows shrink? So no matter what your stitch is, you're crocheting rows or rounds or whatnot, and they're shorter than the pattern indicates. So what to do? That could be based on so many different things. But I will say first and foremost, does it matter if your rows are not or shorter or longer than the pattern indicates? If, you know, size is crucial, then yeah, it's going to matter that your rows aren't measuring up. Is it something that you can just add additional rows or subtract rows if, you know, your project isn't measuring up as the project? You know, can you do any kind of finagling? Next, let's see. I was just reading something. There was some interesting advice about row height whenever it comes to rows. Sorry. And it may also be, it could be a tension, a difference in tension. You know, whenever I crochet, I'm measuring my stitch tension, right? And I'm measuring how my stitches worked up with a yarn and a hook size that I used, right? So that's what I'm measuring. So if you're following my instructions, your tension might not be exactly what mine is. So is there anything you can do to kind of remedy that? Making sure that you're using a good yarn substitute, making sure that you're using a good hook substitute. You know, those are some things that you can change. So really, it's just about, I think that may still be just a gauge question, a size question, and a question of what yarn and hook you're using. And I think that between those, there are alterations you can make to make your work match as close as possible to the pattern. And that's really if size matters. But if you can finagle size, less rows, more rows, or if it really, you know, it's okay that if it's not an exact match, then, you know, that's different. Okay, now here's the second part to your question. Like when you make a blanket, the edge is not straight. That may actually be like two whole other questions. Okay, so let me start with this. If you're making something and your edges aren't straight, that's a stitch counting discrepancy. Okay, let's say you're making whatever, a blanket or whatever. If you're making a rectangle and it's, you're working in rows and you're supposed to have straight edges. So I'm going to give you a resource for that. And it's about what to do. It's about stitch counting and stitch recognition, but essentially, let's break it down to its simplest form. If you're crocheting in rows and your pattern says chain 2, not a stitch, it means you ignore those 2 chains. You pretend like they're not there. And you don't mark it in any way. You don't crochet it into it in any way. It just kind of hangs over there off on the side. So when you do that, when you ignore chain 1, chain 2, then you're going to potentially, depends on your pattern, potentially work your first stitch into the last stitch that you worked in that row. So using stitch markers are going to help you with things like that. If you chain 2 and it does count, then you go chain 1, chain 2. Yep, I'm counting those. Those are represented. And those are going to live in the last stitch I created. So it's going to be chain 1, chain 2, top of first stitch, and that all lives right here. So I think that when you mark the tops of the first stitch that you have in every single row, that's going to help you, and your pattern tells you what counts as a stitch and what doesn't, and you're adequately representing those with stitch markers, then you're going to have straight edges. But another thing that you say is, you're saying the blanket edge is not straight. So I'm wondering if you're talking about borders. And if so, and I got all the resources. That's why I love these. If you're putting a border around something and you're working stitches into the sides, so like not the top, not the bottom, because those are a 1-to-1 stitch ratio. So let's just say you made a blanket. Here's your chain base. Here's row 1, 99 rows here, and row 100 is up there. Row 1, the bottom of row 1 and the top of 100, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. So it doesn't matter what stitch you put into what stitch, it doesn't matter if it's a single, half, double, double, you're always going to put one stitch of single, half, double, double on top of those, and it's going to be equal. But whenever you're talking about the sides, so the ends, the post of the stitch, not the top, not the bottom, but the post, the body of it. If we're working into the side of that, there is a ratio that you have to be aware of. So a single crochet has a 1 stitch ratio. That means that really you can only fit, if you want flat, even borders, if you've got a single crochet, only 1 stitch can fit there. If it's a half double crochet, it's 2, maybe 3, maybe. Half doubles, it's one of those tricky ones to where maybe over 2 half doubles you fit 2 and then 1, or 3 and then 2, or it can get a little tricky. But double is typically 3, so you can fit 3 stitches at the end of it. And that's, if you follow those ratios, depending on your gauge, depending on your stitch tension, and depending on the yarn that you're using sometimes, though that math is going to help you make a nice flat even border. Great questions, and I'm going to post some additional resources on those, and that way you guys can have it. But I'm so glad you're asking those. Jane says, great advice. My pleasure. Nikki is here. Lizzie says, Craftsy, I am working through it just now. Oh, I loved making that class with Craftsy, and I'm so glad that you're taking it. Lizzie, if you're not already part of my group, come on over and join group Salena Baca Crochet. I'd love to hear your crochet journey. If you want to share pictures of your projects, if you want to ask any crochet questions, or if you just want some kudos and share in our community, come on over and do that. Okay, Lizzie, I'd love to see you there. And congratulations. Jessica, hello. It's been a while since I caught a live. I know, it's been a while. I haven't done as many in a while. I kind of got out of the habit. Lynn Morgan is here watching. Jane Campbell says, I have a 9-year-old grandson that has a rather large head. Please, could you suggest a way I can make a hat for him that's quite stretchy, or maybe have another option, please? Yes, I've got tons of options. So, the resources that I posted above, Jane, there's some information there to help. Okay. There's, first and foremost, there's a misconception in the maker world and the crochet world that you should size based on age, right? And that's a misconception because not all 9-year-olds have the same size head. Not all adults have the same size head. Not all babies have the same size head. So if you're sizing based on age alone, it's not always going to be a perfect fit. And I think that that's exactly what you're saying. So what you're going to do is you're going to measure the head. So you're going to measure the circumference of the head. And that's going to get you, how big around does this hat need to be? Now, hats can be made in a few different ways. You can work in joined rounds from the top down, or you can work a hat like I'm wearing right here. This is worked in rows and then it's cinched on one side. So it really depends on what kind of hat you want to make. There are different styles of hats. Do you want him to have a fitted hat? Do you want him to have a slouchy, oversized hat? Are you making a particular hat for him? I do have some hat patterns for you to try, link in the video description. And so if you want to make a hat like this or in rounds from the top down, I've got some resources for you. But essentially, you always want to measure whoever the hat is for. Again, you want to measure around their head, but then you do want to see where it's going to fit based on whatever style you're making. This one I made longer than my head because I wanted it to be slouchy and I also wanted to roll it up. So this hat is bigger than my head in terms of length. So that's kind of what I mean by what style are you going for. If there isn't going to be any extra length and it's just going to be a cap, then what you're going to do is measure from the top of the head, from the crown, to about the middle of the ear, okay? And that's going to be the length. So from the top of the head to the middle of the ear, because that's how the hat is going to fit. And that way, you see the top of my head is up here, middle of my ear is right here. So that's my measurement to make a hat fit me. So hopefully those are some good resources for you. Again, click on the links in the video description because some of those are already there. And if you have any questions or if you just want to share it more about what you're doing, let us know. Shalina is here. Mal is here. Gerlin says, yes, the stitch marker thing is it. Yes. So if you need to have straight edges, if you're not sure what counts as a stitch and what doesn't, if your edges are supposed to be doing something and they're doing this instead, then stitch markers are going to help. But also it's the duty of the pattern, whatever pattern you're following, it's their duty to indicate whenever you're chaining for height to start a new round or start a new row, it's their duty to let you know whether or not that counts as a stitch. And then what do you do with that information? If it counts as a stitch, you mark it in some way. If it doesn't count, you completely ignore it. You pretend like it's not there. You do nothing with it unless the pattern tells you otherwise. Darlene is here. Delia is saying something about, and I think this is advice about that, what if my edges aren't straight or something like that. This is a good tip as well. Delia says, could the foundation row be too tight? Yeah, so that's something else. That's kind of another problem in crochet. Whenever you have a chain, whenever you're chaining anything, but let's say a blanket, you're chaining 100 for a blanket. Chains don't have any give. There's no slack in that stitch because it's so small. It's not like, think of other stitches like, even single crochet or half double crochet or double crochet. Actually, that's a really good example in terms of stretchiness. The bigger the stitch, the more yarn that goes into a stitch, the more opportunity, the more yardage it has to be stretchy. So just based on how much material is in the stitch, chain, not really any material, triple crochet, lots of material. The triple crochet is going to probably have more stretch to it than the chain, just because of how much fabric is in there. Depends on the material that you're using as well, because some materials don't have any stretch. So I'm talking about that a little bit, but I'm also talking about just how much yardage goes into these particular stitches. So yes, whenever you have a long chain, chains don't stretch. They don't have any give. And so yes, sometimes that chain is going to be tighter. It might be a little puckered. It might pucker the rest of your work. So that's definitely something to consider too. Sue Ann is here. Hillary Davidson. Angelica McKinney is here. Angelica, I hope you had a safe and happy and fun move. I hope it's nice and sunny and warm down there where you are. Gerlind, what can I do when the edge of the hat is too wide? And then she says, sew in a, or he or she, sorry. And then you say, sew in a rubber band. That's interesting, but I'm not certain, rubber bands are only so big and they, that can be really uncomfortable. So really, rubber band could be a great thing for like a hair tie if you're going to crochet a hair tie or something like that, but not for a hat. So let me backtrack by saying there are tons of different hat styles. There are tons of different kinds of hats. And I know that some hats, especially like, if you want an opening for like a messy bun hat or something like that, sometimes they do start with a rubber band and they crochet around that and then move outward. And then that's the opening for the, the kind of messy bun look. So there's lots of different styles and you should be able to crochet anything that you think is a solution that you love. There are no wrong answers as long as you love it and you think it's a solution. However, if you're crocheting a hat and the part that goes around your head is too big, it's too wide, my advice, if it's too big and too wide, is it a big slouchy kind of tam hat? If so, maybe that's the look that you're going for. If it's too big and slouchy and you're trying to save it and do something different, I think that each instance kind of deserves its own look. I can't say that there's a one size fits all for all of this, but I will say that whenever I crochet hats from the top down, or even something like this maybe if I wanted, what you can do is put a tighter stitch. We talked about how, chains don't really have any give and triple crochets do. Let's say you made a hat with double crochets or triple crochets from the top down. Well, there's a lot of give in those stitches. There's a lot of stretch. Every time you put it on and take it off, it's, it might kind of alter the fabric a little bit. So what you can do, and what I like to do whenever I crochet hats, is I put a smaller stitch as a band around, and those are my final rounds. So there's even a crochet hat pattern linked above. It's the ombre beanie, and it's a double crochet hat, and I end it with 3 rounds of single crochet, and that single crochet doesn't cinch it, but it definitely makes the end sturdy. So whenever you're putting it on your head, those double crochet stitches may kind of, grow over time. They may become a little more fluid over time, but those single crochet stitches are really going to help anchor it and keep its shape. So not a one size fits all for every hat, but definitely something that you can use sometimes. Karen is here. Angelica, I didn't know what stitch markers were until I joined your group. Game changer for sure. I pretty much use them all the time now. Same. Again, I didn't start using stitch markers until consistently until maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I thought I was one of those. I don't say stuff like this anymore, but if you are ever the kind of person who says, I've been crocheting for 20 years, I've been crocheting for 50 years, every time I hear statements like that, I feel like you've decided that you're not going to learn anymore. You've decided that you've crocheted for so long that you should know everything. I used to say things like that, and I realized that it's really just kind of a stunt in my own personal growth. So really instead, my mind is always open to learning and growing. So 7 years ago, I wrote a pattern and it wasn't working. And I didn't know why it wasn't working, because I could crochet it and it was working perfect for me. But people, my pattern testers were working up and it wasn't working for them. And it was because some people were counting the chain beginning as a stitch and some people weren't. And it was a particular pattern to where that mattered because it was a color work pattern. And so my friend was like, yeah, so when you say chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, you're going to ignore that. And this is what that means, and use a stitch marker. So shout out to Danielle Pink of Crazy Socks Designs, because she's the one who taught me that doesn't matter how long you've been crocheting or what you think you know, sometimes just understanding little key pieces of information and having an indicator like that is going to be a really helpful tool. I still do that to this day because it's so much more helpful to just say chain 2 doesn't count, stitch marker goes here, and then just go about your way. That's so much more helpful than doing your work and then trying to catch up afterwards. So anyway, I think stitch markers, I agree with you, Angelica, they are a game changer. It doesn't matter how long you've been crocheting. It's just such a helpful tool and resource. It's just a great way to check yourself. Angelica says, thank you. The drive was long, but we saw so many beautiful places. The movers, well, that's been awful, but it will be all right. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And you guys drove. I think you were driving from almost the East Coast to the West Coast. I'm not going to give out too much of your information. Man, that's a heck of a drive. I've driven across America a few times. I've driven from Georgia all the way out to California. We've, you know, gosh, so it can be a really interesting drive depending on what route you took. And yeah, if the military moved you, yeah, I've had a few of those moves, and it can be interesting. It can be real interesting. Anyway, I hope all of your stuff gets there in one piece. Hopefully nothing's broken and they didn't lose anything. And if they did, hopefully you have pictures beforehand and everything turns out all right. Hello, Wendy. Good to see you. Melanie Thomas. Long time no see. So good to see you, my friend. Thank you for being here. Wendy's here from Australia. Thank you for checking in. Hello. Samantha is here watching. Hello. Been a long time. I know it has been. It's good to be here though. Melanie Thomas, I always use them. I think stitch markers, even on an easy pattern, less counting, less mistakes. Exactly. Yeah. When you're just using those stitch markers, it means you've already determined, checked, and decided where you're beginning and where you're ending. And so it really is just such a fantastic way for you to just continuously monitor that whatever you're doing is accurate. So it's fantastic. I love it. And I'm not changing it. I mean, I'm working on it. My whip downstairs right now has got stitch markers, and it's an easy pattern. But it's especially those easy ones that make us go, it's easy. I don't need any help. Oh no, I'd like all the help I can get, please. Angelica, yes, it was. We were so disappointed that we didn't have enough time to actually see Mesa Verde, but we will go back. Yeah, I know. Sometimes when you're going on a long drive, sometimes you know what you want to stop and look at. And you make time for that. And sometimes there are just some gems and it's like, oh man, I wish we had more time to stop and look at this. And you know, it's like, oh, next time. So glad it was a good trip. All right, everybody. That's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully there were some gems of information in there for you. I've added some links to the beginning things that I talked about here. And I'm also going to add a few more links in the video description, just of those extra things that we talked about, like when to use stitch markers, how to measure, to make a hat fit. Yeah. All right. And as always, I really, really enjoy crochet questions. And even if I don't know, I will look it up. I'll find some resources. I love learning new things. I do not know all the things. I do not pretend to know all the things. But I think that whenever we have questions come up in the crochet community, it just really helps us all broaden our knowledge and skill. And it's fun to just kind of make sure that we've got good resources in the crochet world. So these are fun and I enjoy them, and I hope you guys learned something new. All right. If you guys did enjoy this video, subscribe, share this video in at least one place where you enjoy crochet if you think it will help them. All right. Peace, love, crochet, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.